Have you ever been listening to a creepy ghost story or haunting history, and you're like, damn, this is so enjoyable, but I wish my friends were here so we could experience it together? That's us, Gina and Catherine, and we'll bring the snacks when you join us on I Scream, You Scream, the podcast where we serve up chilling stories with a side of our favorite ice cream.
Every month, we pick a new flavor of ice cream and a new topic to go along with it. Werewolves, poison, cemeteries, you name it. From deep dives into stories we all thought we knew to your real-world experiences, at this ice cream party, we always get to the bottom of the bowl.
Cozy up with us every Tuesday for your weekly scoop of the most chilling histories, mysteries, and paranormal perplexities. Until then, keep it cool.
And keep it creepy with I Scream, You Scream wherever you listen to podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. An important note, sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. When we think about San Juan, Puerto Rico, it's likely that beautiful white sand beaches come to mind. A tourist hotspot, San Juan is renowned for its 16th century Spanish forts, vibrant nightlife, cobblestone streets, and delicious food. It's a place where history and modernity come together in a stunning and gorgeous presentation. But did you know, just outside Old San Juan was a place so notorious and fear-inducing, it was called the Alcatraz of the Caribbean. Oso Blanco Prison, which means white bear, was known for a dark and tragic history filled with brutal violence, including gang warfare, murders, drug abuse, dismemberments, an inmate civil war, and a violent uprising. And prior to its demolition in 2015, it was widely considered the most haunted location in Puerto Rico, with former inmates, visitors, and prison staff claiming a wide array of paranormal and supernatural activity. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the infamous Oso Blanco Prison. What dark history was hidden behind the walls of the Alcatraz of the Caribbean? And what spirits were said to linger deep within Oso Blanco's depths? I'll share the details. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. Despite being only 20 minutes apart, the contrast between Old San Juan and Oso Blanco Prison could not be starker. The prison opened in 1933, during a period in history where incarceration was focused more on punishment than rehabilitation. And while its design reflected this, Oso Blanco was initially intended to serve as a place for inmate reform. Massive concrete walls, steel-barred and cramped cells, and tight corridors and spaces combined to create an oppressive and hopeless environment. Outside the prison, 2 female statues guarded the entrance, one on each side of an archway, with a quote from Concepcion Arenal, a renowned Spanish feminist and sociologist, that read, "Hate the crime and pity the criminal." The building itself was massive, and featured 332 cells that could house between 500 and 800 inmates, 12 pavilions, a medical clinic, a mental health wing and psychiatric hall, a library, classrooms, workshops, a kitchen, restrooms, an interior patio, and a mess hall with capacity for 500 inmates. The prison derived its nickname, the White Bear, from the whitewashed exterior walls and its hulking presence over San Juan. Even from a distance, the towering prison could be seen looming over the treetops, almost as if lying in wait. Though Oso Blanco was constructed with rehabilitation in mind, within a decade it had become dangerously overcrowded. Cells intended to house 1 or 2 inmates routinely held 4 or 5, or more. And at its peak, the entire prison housed nearly 3,000 inmates, leading to significant problems. The climate of Puerto Rico is often humid, especially during the summer months, when temperatures often exceed 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And inside the poorly ventilated and not air-conditioned Oso Blanco, indoor temperatures routinely push the suffocating 110 degrees. Overcrowding also contributed to poor sanitation due to a lack of maintenance, failing infrastructure, and vermin infestation. Inmates often experienced malfunctioning plumbing, walls covered in urine and feces, infestation by bugs and rodents, a lack of consistent running water, and a shortage of personal hygiene supplies, including soap. All of this contributed to the spread of sickness and disease, with inmates perishing due to a lack of basic care. As if the living conditions weren't bad enough, prison guards often made inmates' lives significantly more difficult, ruling with an iron fist and not hesitating to use physical force and corporal punishment to secure compliance. For a moment, put yourself in an inmate's shoes. It's the middle of August and the sun is beating down outside. The humidity makes the air thick and suffocating. You're housed in a small cell designed for no more than 2 people. But as you look around the room, you count yourself and at least 6 others. There aren't enough beds, but you were there first, so a mattress is a rare comfort in an otherwise barely livable situation. Except it's also a double-edged sword, because the other inmates, those sleeping on the concrete floor, are jealous and could turn on you when you least expect it. So instead of a restful night's sleep, you're forced to sleep with one eye open. Outside the cell, conditions only grow worse. The smell of urine and feces pervades the air, combining with the sickly scent of sweat and stale body odor. You haven't showered in weeks, maybe months, and at best all you can do is rinse off every few days in the hope of staying clean. The lack of sanitation has brought vermin of all kinds, but the worst are the rats who carry disease and have no trouble attacking you and other inmates. And that's not even the worst thing that can happen at Oso Blanco. Getting sick is almost a death sentence, and maybe a welcome one, because you still have the other inmates to look out for, and violence feels like it's around every corner. And as time goes on, you wonder if maybe death is a comfort given these circumstances, because staying locked up at Oso Blanco might be a fate worse than death. If rehabilitation, rather than punishment, was the goal of the prison administration and staff, then survival was the goal of the prison population. A 2009 documentary, Oso Blanco, documents the brutal and violent history of the prison, often with first-hand interviews with former inmates and the former prison warden. In one poignant segment early in the film, the warden describes the rationale behind 2 of the most infamous gangs to have come from Oso Blanco, the Asociación Nieta and Los 27. And while other gangs sprang up, these 2 were the most influential, and they were sworn enemies and the most violent. As overcrowding increased and conditions worsened and control tightened, many turned to violence and brutality to survive. Beatings, stabbings, sexual assaults, riots, and murder were all a part of life at Oso Blanco. In one especially gruesome recounting, the former warden detailed how inmates quote-unquote escaped from the prison. He claimed that after committing a murder, inmates would dismember the remains and trample upon them with their feet to separate the soft tissues from the bones. The soft tissue would then be cut into smaller pieces and flushed down the toilets. The bones would then be placed into a pillowcase and smashed against the concrete walls and floors until they broke into smaller pieces. And then these too would be flushed down the toilet. And within a few hours, an inmate would have been noticed missing. But with no witnesses coming forward, and the only word being that he escaped, that would be the end of the story. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. From the 1970s into the early 1980s, the inmates at Oso Blanco were embroiled in a civil war, and it was one of the bloodiest and most savage periods at the prison. Driven by the rivalry between the Nietas and Los 27, the war within the population directly led to the deaths of hundreds of inmates. Men scrambled to make homemade weapons, including knives and shanks, roughly sharpened pieces of metal and plastic, and other improvised weapons. They split into smaller factions and groups and committed to protecting their territory, sometimes nothing more than a hallway or row of cells, and each other. And the Civil War lingered, with extended periods of unrest, followed by periods of bloodshed and violence for nearly a decade. During this time, inmates would launch surprise attacks on their enemies, often at mealtimes or during periods of transition, such as going to or coming from the restroom. They planned ambushes to be carried out under the cover of shadow late at night, and enacted revenge killings. Inmates slept in shifts while others kept watch, and living under the threat of danger and death became an everyday thing. Something interesting. The natural question that comes to mind is, where were the prison guards, and why didn't they stop the chaos? The answer is unsettling, because part of Oso Blanco's sordid history involves corruption, mismanagement, and complicit prison staff. In some cases, guards actively participated in the brutality, and in others, they willingly turned their backs as violence went on around them. Perhaps the most feared name in all of Oso Blanco was Carlos Torres Iriarte, also known as La Sombra, and the founder of the Asociación Nieta. Growing up in poverty in Puerto Rico, Carlos Torres Iriarte was introduced to the prison system as a teenager, and he learned quickly that survival required two things: the willingness to do whatever it took to stay safe, even if it meant hurting or killing someone else, and the ability to avoid detection and capture. His nickname, La Sombra, means the shadow. And while he could be ruthless, La Sombra founded the Nietas as an inmate rights group. Of course, there are those who believe the Nietas served a dual purpose: advocacy on one end, and a cover for criminal activity on the other. His growing influence and power made him a target for prison officials and other inmates and gangs. And on March 30th, 1981, while on the patio of Oso Blanco, La Sombra was murdered after being shot and stabbed, allegedly by those associated with Los 27. While researching, I came across varying details concerning his death, but as best I can piece it together, it seems La Sombra was ambushed and assassinated, and that prison officials may have known beforehand and allowed it to happen. Of course, these are allegations without corroborating evidence, as the paper trail back in those days was less than reliable. What is certain, though, is La Sombra's death shocked the inmate population, and while his enemies believed his death would weaken the Nietas, it actually resulted in the opposite. La Sombra became a martyr, and the Nietas expanded within Oso Blanco. And as inmates were released, they also grew in Puerto Rico and beyond. In the years following La Sombra's death, Oso Blanco remained notorious for poor living conditions, violence, and tragedy. And in 2004, it was officially closed, with inmates being transferred to other prisons. And in 2015, Oso Blanco Prison was demolished. But what about the alleged hauntings? As Oso Blanco descended into chaos and violence, inmates began telling stories of the strange and scary paranormal activity they experienced. A place filled with suffering and death is alleged to be fertile soil for restless spirits to reside, and prisoners at Oso Blanco claim to have heard footsteps walking along empty corridors and voices whispering their names in the darkness of their cell. Some claim to have heard and seen cell doors rattling from unseen hands, and former prison guards claim to have experienced cold spots in different areas of the prison, despite the tropical climate outside and the overwhelming heat inside. Some inmates claim to see shadow figures standing motionless in their cells, partially hidden by other objects as if stalking them. In the 2009 documentary, a former inmate reported hearing screams coming from empty tiers. One of the most famous stories involves a prisoner who was beaten to death near the solitary confinement wing, and whose cries and screams of pain and agony could be heard at all hours of the night. Others have reported hearing a man screaming in Spanish late at night, voices yelling for help, not just within the prison, but also seemingly inside their cells, chains being dragged along concrete floors, and quote, rhythmic tapping like someone hitting bars with metal, end quote. Others heard soft cries and whimpering, and were presumed to be the spirits of those who died by suicide. Those who were placed in solitary confinement and subsequently released reported hearing voices whispering to them from the walls. These men, hardened by the brutality of prison life in Oso Blanco, claimed they requested to be moved, even begging in desperation, only to have their pleas go unheard. They claimed that unseen men spoke to them throughout the night. Residents outside the walls of Oso Blanco, living in the neighborhood surrounding the prison, alleged to have seen faces staring at them through the barred windows for years after the prison had closed. When Oso Blanco Prison shut down in 2004, construction workers claimed to see tools move on their own, and while standing in the courtyard, surrounded by abandoned cell blocks, they reported feeling watched by unseen eyes and hearing strange whispering voices with no discernible source. While walking through the abandoned building, many experienced sudden nausea, especially in the cells closer to solitary confinement. As with any discussion surrounding haunted locations, skeptics claim the alleged paranormal activity can be explained logically and rationally, pointing less to tortured spirits and more towards architecture and mental illness. Others point to the lack of verifiable scientific evidence to support the claims of a haunting. Now let's go with this for a moment. The picture of a massive, abandoned prison with a traumatic, violent history looks and feels like it should be haunted. But that's also a part of confirmation bias. If someone goes into a location believing it's haunted, they may convince themselves it is. Oso Blanco's fearsome and scary reputation no doubt influenced the stories and experiences that came from it. But here's the thing, and I've said this in other episodes. The possibility, even the likelihood, that some of the strange occurrences can be explained rationally doesn't mean a place isn't haunted. In some ways, what you think about Oso Blanco Prison is entirely dependent on whether you believe the voices speaking have credibility or not. Are former inmates reliable narrators? Can former prison guards and staff be trusted to tell the truth of what they saw, heard, and experienced? For a place whose history is among the darkest and most oppressive, the amount of negative energy lingering there would have been consequential. And what about the stories themselves? Are they outsized, embellished, and exaggerated? Possibly. An exaggerated story doesn't make the foundational truth suddenly untrue. A shadow figure standing silently in a corner may be exaggerated to detail movement or sounds. But if the shadow figure was there, it was there, regardless of how the story was embellished later. So for me, it's not all that unbelievable to think Oso Blanco Prison, one of the most notorious in the Caribbean and a place of unimaginable cruelty, suffering, violence, and brutality, was home to negative energy, disquieted spirits, and strange goings-on. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question. Was Oso Blanco Prison truly haunted? I've shared the details. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.